Yeah, so I've been working on this podcast, and I'll drop the link in the chat unless someone's faster than me, which is often the case. But it basically takes you through the story of how housing got broken, at least with interesting entry point if you haven't checked it out yet. Today, we just released the third episode. It's been every other week, and there will be five in total, which is you have secret info now because everyone else thinks there's only four, but there's actually five. And the fifth one is probably going to be my favorite because it'll take us to South Bend, Indiana. And South Bend's story is not only a really inspiring one, but a very, very important one to know, especially if you go through this podcast and you're like, wow, everything seems so bleak and dark, and there's
Mm.
this big monster. How do we defeat this big monster? We need a bigger monster. And South Bend is like, I don't know. I think there's another way to go about it. So
Yeah, that's fantastic, and it definitely ties into a lot of the work that we're doing. And so, yeah, Scott has already shared the Stacked Against Us podcast with his wife. I think it is the closest thing to something like Serial without involving as much murder, but certainly enough drama to keep us on the edge of our seats. So that's awesome. Welcome as folks are rolling in. Glad that you are here, and I've got a few questions for our podcast host, but I want to just open it up in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself if you're like, hey, I've got questions either for Chuck about the longest running Strong Towns podcast, or about I think might be here as one of the reps for Upzoned because Abby couldn't make it today, but that is definitely one of the other podcasts. But I have a question for the folks that are in the chat, which is, this will be in the chat as well. But which of the podcasts are you regularly watching? I mean, watching. Well, you can watch it on YouTube, I suppose. But so drop in the chat A, B, C, or D. Which of the podcasts? And if you listen to different ones, then drop in each of those letters independently. So, for example, I know that I listened to the most recent episode of Stacked Against Us this morning, and that will start to show up as it populates there. So let's see where you all, I guess it's a bit of a test. I could have included the option, none of them yet. If that's the case, definitely go check them out. But we've got a pretty healthy response here. Upzoned is the one that needs extra listeners. Oh, Asha, I see what you're doing, but it won't actually work that way. You'll have to independently input them. So, Chuck, people actually listen to you. What's been your experience with the Strong Towns podcast so far?
It's funny because every now and then I will do an episode that I want to listen to again. I'm like, did that turn out well or not? And I kind of want to listen to it as other people listen to it. And what I tend to do is I get up in the morning and I've got a speaker and I turn it on in the bathroom and I have it on like in the shower and everything. And inevitably, if I'm listening to my own podcast, my wife will come in and she'll make some comment about, oh, listening to yourself again. Oh, I see lots of humility there. She'll make some snide remark about me listening to myself. And I'm like, no, I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to did this, as it went through to the end and was released, does it sound the way I want it to sound, or did I do something different? That doesn't play with her. She thinks I'm vain and I'm listening to myself from a vanity standpoint. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I love it. Why don't we start with the, what does that look like? 6 or 7 people that regularly are on here that are listening to the Strong Towns podcast. Questions for Chuck, and then we'll go through each of them and we'll come down to Stacked Against Us. But any sort of question that you came with today for Chuck as we get started?
Can I tell you while you're waiting?
Yeah.
I'll tell you my favorite episode.
Oh yeah.
It's funny because people have gotten back to me about this, that it was their favorite episode too. I've heard it like numerous times. It was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, after someone else had died in Springfield on State Street. They had a conversation with their engineer. They brought in their public works director, and the public works director made a presentation. The city council talked to them, and they were talking back and forth. And the vibe that I got from them was, hey, we reached a consensus. Like we figured something out. And I listened to it, that meeting, and I thought they think they agree with each other, but they don't. They're speaking completely different languages. And so I did this episode where I served as the interpreter between what political people are saying and what engineers are saying and how they should actually understand each other. And people said that was the greatest episode that I've ever done. And I kind of feel very proud of it because it was one of those instances where I think having had a foot in both realms and being able to see both sides and kind of understand and interpret, I probably we as an organization probably did help some people to understand what they were hearing in a clearer way. So that
Mhm.
was kind of fun.
Mhm.
And it was fun because it was spliced clips, not just me talking or me interviewing someone, but like, other things. And then I would interpret. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of a kick.
Yeah. I won't ask you your worst guest, but what about your best guest or your most
Oh,
like
I
impactful
can
one?
tell you,
Yeah.
I've had horrible guests and you'd never hear them. They don't run. I,
Right.
I had one podcast once that was so incredibly bad that after like 20 minutes, I'm like, this isn't working. Like we're done. And it was two professors who this is maybe like 2016, 2015. So like I'm earnestly trying to build this podcast up and okay, I got these two professors. I read their book. They were the most boring guests you've ever had. They had a publicist who like reached out to me, really wanted to be on the podcast. I'm like, okay, I can make this happen. And it was so bad. I pulled the plug in like 20 minutes and no one's going to hear that episode ever.
Yeah. That's
uh,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
Scott, I love your comment there. Why don't you jump in? I would love your thoughts on the just the most recent episode that you mentioned there.
As I said in the comment, maybe I've been a member 6 months, not that long ago. So just the history of, you know, going from the podcast to where you are today, the step along the way, I've never heard any of that. So that was
Mhm.
great. I appreciated the background. It was really good context for what's happening today and where you're going, what you're doing going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's hard for me sometimes because I realize that for me it's an ongoing story that's been ongoing for 17 years now. And sometimes I just stop where the last episode left off and I assume prior knowledge. But if you look at the readership, I mean, the readership and the listenership and everything on the site goes up by 50 to 100% every year. Well, what that means, when you have, say on YouTube, where we saw, last year was like 5 million views and this year's 12 million, that means there's literally like millions of people who don't have that backstory. And I appreciate what you're saying because sometimes I feel like I'm repeating myself or going back and saying the same thing. But when there's new people coming in, it's really helpful. And I think it's helpful for me too to ground in that way. So I appreciate that feedback.
Um, let's move on down to Tiffany. Down only in the ordering or in the stacking here. Tiffany, since you've joined as our Bottom Up Revolution host, share a little bit about sort of what that experience has been like and some of your impressions. I love that there's Upzone does have the lead right now in terms of the number of participants that listen to it. No, Bottom Up Revolution does. So there we go. But yeah, what attracted you to take on the host role, and then what's been the experience like?
I have a background in journalism, and my favorite part of being a journalist was doing interviews. I like being a journalist because it meant that I got to learn from people all day and get paid for it. And as someone who has one of my, like, I don't know if you guys ever do the strength finders, but learner was one of my top strengths, and I just thought it was so fun that I could just talk to people, ask some questions, and learn something new. Is one of my favorite parts of being a journalist back in the day when I worked for a magazine. But honestly, when I found out about the opportunity to host that show, I remember, I think I told you, Norm, that I read the email 4 times because I was so confused. I was like, you were so like, oh, by the way, we should be reaching out to you about hosting the podcast. And I was like, wait, what? Like I had my husband read it, I read it, and I was like, did I read this correctly? Am I reading this correctly? It honestly, it felt like it was a huge honor to be able to be part of the Strong Towns movement in that way. And it's not like I was like running a podcast and you guys thought I was doing such a great job or anything like that. So it was just a real honor to be trusted with that, to be entrusted with that. And again, to have the opportunity to learn from people who were doing the real work of putting these principles into action, which I think is something that a lot of people aspire to, but maybe they just haven't made that jump yet. I'm still kind of in that boat, still trying to figure out like what does my meaningful action look like in Waco. But I thought it was a huge honor to be the one to capture their stories and their insights and bring that to a wider audience. So people come up to me and they're like, especially at the national gathering, they're like, oh my God, I love the show. Or, I've gotten great feedback, and I always genuinely remind people, like, the guests are the star, like the people we get to talk to who are doing the work. Like I just get to capture their story and bring it to you. But yeah, constantly looking for ways to ask better questions. It has been really inspiring hearing so many of the stories I've been able to capture now. And yeah, it's just, I've had such a variety of guests on the show, from so many different types of places. And I think now anyone can officially say, well, Tiffany, you absolutely have no excuse, because you've gotten to capture, who knows how many stories at this point. So yeah, it keeps me constantly inspired. And yeah, just constantly excited. I'm always excited when I hear of someone new that I get to capture their story and share it with everybody.
Are there a couple of words that come to mind that sort of serve as good descriptions of most of your guests? Kind of, are some sort of like things that you would say like, oh, many of the people that we feature kind of have this in common?
Most of them are just ordinary people. They're not
Mm.
experts. They're not technical experts. They're not running for office. They're not industry experts or running a business in this field at all. Most of them, I have diversified a little bit and like brought on people that we would consider more expert in this sphere, and definitely talked to a couple of people who are serving in public office. But for the most part, I would say they're just ordinary people who found that first step, and then just let things, and just rode the flywheel as it got going, and developed, just took their observations. They found a way to translate observations into action, and many of them do that while raising kids, while working full-time jobs, while running separate businesses. And so I would say that's the general description.
That's awesome. We'll cycle back for questions, but I wanted to bring up Asha and Sierra because you guys have been collaborating, and probably Sierra, it's due you're due for more recognition as in the background, putting together not only the Stacked Against Us podcast, but also all of the other podcasts. And so, do you want to introduce yourself, Sierra, and then let's chat a little bit about the Stacked Against Us project.
Yeah, like Norm said, my name is Sierra, and I work in the background a lot in pretty much all of our video and podcast projects. It's a lot of fun and a lot of stories always going through my head. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Asha, describe sort of, kind of the what is next, even this fifth episode. Can you tease a little bit about that?
I think I did earlier, but I'll do it again. So the fifth episode is the reason. So Chuck wrote, he didn't even know there was going to be a fifth episode. So it's a surprise for even the people who are responsible for Strong Towns. But basically, as we were putting together this story, I felt that I needed to balance the scales. There was a lot of building up the problem and not enough being excited about what's possible. And part of that was the consequence of me learning and creating something at exactly the same time, and therefore maybe dwelling on some things that were, dramatic and exciting, but also perhaps shouldn't have gotten, I mean, not that they shouldn't have gotten as much weight as they did. And the feedback that I've gotten is people really kind of enjoy it. But I just needed more of that balance. One, because I think that's Strong Towns' strength. I love whenever, I go on any YouTube video that we've put out in the last few years, and there's always like in the first few comments, someone's like, this is such a breath of fresh air within urbanist YouTube or whatever it is, that it's not just dwelling on the problem, on what's wrong, on these like massive systems that seem impossible to kind of unpack and unravel. It's like, hey, you can actually do something about this. And so I was like, I think the best way to wrap this up is not just to talk about incremental development. It's not just to kind of usher people to the toolkits and all the stories we've been able to tell here at Strong Towns, especially in the last year. It's to actually go to South Bend again, which we did on YouTube 2 years ago, 1 year ago. I go back to that video all the time. It's fantastic. And you really get a feel for the South Bend story. I don't want to tell you too much because I want you to go to YouTube and watch that video because it's really good, and obviously listen to the episode. But if you're not familiar, South Bend is the story of building an ecosystem of incremental developers. And the word ecosystem, excuse me, isn't just like, oh, we're taking a fun word that feels applicable. Like, no, you really realize how apt that term is to describe what's going on there. And I was like, I think this place is great. And through South Bend, I also connected with some other satellite cities like Kalamazoo. So that was a long-winded way of answering your question, but I was just like, we need to land here and put all the insights in action, put all the things that we're talking about into a place that is really exercising that and is also continuously asking really, really important questions. One insight, for example, is like treating policy as a living document, like the zoning code as a living document. That's something that Tim Corcoran in South Bend told me. And I was like, oh, that's so great. It's not just this once in a lifetime overhaul. And it's like, great, well, now we fixed it, guys. It's better. It's like, no, it's so dynamic. And I feel like this is a place that is really, really exercising a lot of these ideas that we talk about, especially in housing. So.
Yeah, and that contrast of like leaps versus gradual like accumulation of layers. And sort of there's this idea like our cities just need to proceed like in an orderly way. Every once in a while we do the big change rather than saying like an archaeologist who looks and is like, oh, that sand slowly built up around, the artifacts and created the conditions for that. And I know that this is a story that we pitched internally. We've had others. Sierra, do you want to share a little bit about like even the Just Accounting project? And we've come close. And then Chuck, maybe you can weigh in on some of the strategy there, where we said this will probably be the big one that we want to push forward with Stacked Against Us. But do you want to share a little bit, Sierra, how we even looked at doing podcast version of this for the Just Accounting project?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about doing a multiple part sort of series podcast for, I don't know, almost 2 years now, I want to say, is when it like first surfaced as a, hey, we should do this. And if you're not familiar with the Just Accounting Project, it was this 4 years ago now? The timeline is just elongating. Was when we partnered with Urban 3 and we looked at the a bunch of different cities, and the word is like blanking on me right now. Maybe you can help me.
Inequities in the assessment
Yeah, thank
practices.
you.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I touched that project. Anyways, the research was so compelling from it, and it was an intensive like investigative partnership that we did with Urban 3 that we thought that would make a really good podcast, and maybe that'll still happen one day.
Yeah.
But then housing, is such a big topic that really needs to be talked about a lot more. And we have a lot of amazing insights that need to be shared on that. And Asha's got a great podcast voice talent. So we went forward with that. It's a really good story. And I don't know if you want to add on to that, Asha.
I was thinking of, we had a member, Alex Alsop, that brought the story to us. Urban 3 had brought the Just Accounting sort of inequities to us. It's certainly, Tiffany and I, myself with the Bottom Up Shorts as well, like we really benefit whenever members are like, you've got to have so-and-so on. Just don't be a publicist and make sure they're not boring. But if you could do that, that definitely goes a long ways. And Chuck, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of organizationally why we use podcasting, why we rely on this, and some of our structures that we've set up to help enable that?
I think it's, maybe from like an insider standpoint, when I write an article, that article will be read by 5,000 people, right? They'll get like 5,000 hits, which is a lot. Like that's a really good article. And just so people know, I am married to someone in media and, who works for public radio here in Minnesota. We study a lot of other websites. We know what web traffic is like. For the size of our organization, our reach is like really, really big comparatively speaking. So we're getting like good numbers. But if you write an article, me, anybody else, it's going to get 2,000 to 5,000 downloads. People have come to expect my Monday morning article, so that one tends to get a little bit more. And then every now and then you'll have one that breaks out and gets 100,000 downloads. But that happens maybe like once or twice a year. Usually you're kind of, in that two to 5,000 range for most articles we publish. When we publish a podcast, it's getting 7,000 downloads, it's getting 10,000 downloads. And I think the big difference between an article and a podcast, if you think of yourself as reading an article, if we get 5,000 people that read an article, or if you get one that blows up and it's 100,000 people, what percentage of those actually sit and read that article? They'll skim it, they'll go through, we get bounce rate statistics and other things, but we can see, some articles are really engaging. People will read to the bottom. But even then, if you're getting, 50% of people who read all the way to the bottom, that's a really big deal. For us, engagement is a metric that we look at, but what we're really looking at is the spread of the ideas. How are people talking about this? How are ideas getting out? The thing about podcasts that's just different is that it's a more intimate, more personal medium. And so it's almost like, and I've said this like shorthand in my mind, if you get one person who downloads a podcast, it's like 10 people, reading an article. It's like 100 people watching a video, just because of like the intensity of the connection. So the podcasts tend to be really like where you get a lot of depth and idea dissemination, where you, quite frankly, we build a lot of trust as an organization, because you can't be inauthentic and BS your way through an hour-long podcast every week. Like, you just wind up getting to know people, and there's an authenticity that kind of comes out of that you can't fake. And so I feel like the greatest vehicle we have for sharing our message is the podcast streams. The difference between a podcast and an article, or a podcast and a video, is that there's not the upside. So I mentioned that one video that we did, the 2 different languages one from 3 Decembers ago. That one is probably my most downloaded episode ever. It has 16,000 downloads. So it'll never get, like with a podcast, you'll never get 100. I wrote an article last year that had like 200,000 downloads or views. You will never get that in a podcast. But what you do is you get this breadth of messaging and this depth of messaging. I think Sierra actually like sold herself a little short the first time you went to her. So I was going to say, part of doing a good podcast stream is the consistency of publishing, being on top of things. That actually requires more than just recording an episode. It requires scheduling guests, doing research, following up when it's done, all the editing, working with the editor. There's a whole bunch of like behind the scenes coordination that is not like AI level, like we can just program this in. It actually takes a thoughtful person to like go through this and think about how it's going to all relate to each other, when we're going to schedule things, how that flow is going to be, how it's going to be coordinated with the rest of the team. And when you see, I shared that dashboard, when you see the value of our podcast rising, yes, part of it is because I think Tiffany does a great job. I think Abby does a great job. I think Norm, you're adding the shorts has been a real huge value. But the big thing is that we're just like way more professional behind the scenes in like the plumbing that people don't see. And that's Sierra like keeping everything lined up and working. So I just want to make sure that was part of our dialogue too, because she doesn't get the credit for making this all work the way that she probably deserves.
I love that. That's well-deserved, Sierra. And yeah, that's awesome. Let's roll out more broadly questions. So here, I'm going to revert everybody back to nobody gets a spotlight anymore. Everybody gets a seat at the table. Go ahead. And what questions did you either come with, or do you now have about the kind of any of the podcasts, any sort of, what's your curiosity? And welcome. We've got a few extra folks that have just joined. Glad you're here as well. So jump in.
Hi. Well, something I'm curious about is is probably hard to find out, but your inclination as to how many people are listening to the Strong Towns podcast because they've, in a sense, graduated from the articles. They know the basics. They're hungry for that deep dive, versus some people who are like, oh, I don't like to read so much, but I like the podcast. Because if I were to look at myself, I'm definitely somebody who's in the former category. Like, okay, I want the deep dive. but I'm somebody who would read the stuff, consume the content no matter what. And I'm wondering if the podcast or maybe this new one is reaching untapped audiences or if it's doubling down for the people who are already into strong towns.
It's a really good question. And I think I would have a question back. And I have this broader question just about podcast listeners themselves. Because of all the mediums that we use, podcasting is the most opaque to us. When we do a video, and Sierra, maybe you should talk about this a little bit too, we get ridiculous amounts of analytic feedback on the video. Here's where people stopped watching. Here's where people like bugged out. Here's the cover image that worked better than the other one because they'll show it to 10,000 people and see how many percentage click. Here's the demographics of the people who watch it. When we look at our articles that we write, we don't quite get that information, but we get a different set of information that's also really helpful. We can look at a specific page and see how far did people scroll? Where do they get lost in the article? We've got overall demographics on our website that is, somewhat unreliable, but somewhat reliable too. Like I think it actually does give us good information. On podcasts, we get one number, downloads. That's it. And downloads encompasses streams as well. So if you stream it instead of download it, that's what we get. So we don't know who our audience is, what episodes they like, what episodes they don't like, where they stop listening, where they, attack. Do they like monologue podcasts that I do, or do they like interview podcasts that I do? I will do a monologue podcast and I will get emails from people saying, this was great. I wish you'd do more monologues. And then I'll get other people saying, why are you doing so many monologues? Go back to interviews. Monologues horrible. You don't really know because you can't statistically, the episodes kind of all download the same. And so for me, it's hard for me to say, let me put it this way. I feel like I put more effort and energy into the writing that I do than the podcasts personally, because the writing takes I'm always trying to think through ideas and that's what comes out of my writing. And I feel like the podcasting for me is downstream of that. So I actually feel like if you asked me, where am I going to get the deepest dive? I would say with the articles. Now, where are we going to get the most intimate like conversation back and forth and exploring of ideas and kind of pushing and stuff? Yeah, you're going to get that in the podcast. I almost feel like it's less of are you at undergraduate or graduate level, and more what's your kind of preferred way of getting information is my sense. But like I said, the podcast audience is very opaque to us. It's very opaque. I just know that tons of people listen because everywhere I go, people come up to me and say, I'm a podcast listener. I'm a podcast listener. Or they say, it's so weird to hear you talk in person because I listen to you on the podcast all the time. And it is that way. I know I listen to people on the radio or whatever. And then when you meet them in person, it's really weird to see a human when you've had this disembodied voice. So I get that effect, but that's how I would try to think about it. And I wish there were better analytics, but there really is not. There really isn't.
So a couple comments. I just want to say, Chuck, there was a podcast of yours that I really enjoyed. It's maybe like a year and a half ago. I'm trying to remember the title. I think it was something like "Oh Crap," about sewage systems.
Yeah.
I want to say I learned an awful lot from that podcast. It actually gave me a lot of empathy for our city's public works departments. But the question I had was, you mentioned editing the podcasts, and I'm kind of curious just practically how that process works, because when I listen to them, and I tend to sort of binge on the podcast. I'll go for months without listening to any, and then I'll just listen to a ton within a few days or a week. But to me, uh, the podcast, they seem very natural. They don't sound like they're heavily edited in a good way. But I am kind of curious, like, how does that work?
I would be interested in how other people do them because I feel like I just have my own process. So when I do a podcast, if I'm doing an interview, um, I will, I will generally like in walking the dog and everything, and just like trying to think. I'll spend like I've got an interview with someone next week. I will spend the week like just thinking about it, and then when I come across a question or some line of thinking, I'll write it down. Now I use Notion on my phone to write these things, but I'll try to come to the day of the podcast with like 5 or 6 lines of discussion I want to have. I feel like I ask too long of questions. Like my setup is too long, but it tends to work okay. When I watch the stats afterwards, I see like in a 60-minute podcast, if I can talk 10 minutes or less, that's a good podcast. When I start to talk 15, 20 minutes, I'm like, I was talking too much. Um, but the monologue ones, I just sit down and I will take like I've got one here that I started. Where is that one? Um, yeah, I will just write like a series of notes, and then I just sit down and talk, and I try to make it wrap up in 50 to 55 minutes. And so I'll have a watch and I'll be like, okay, I'm only through half of this. I better get moving, or I'm a little bit too long. I better speed up. And then I try to land the ship at 55 to 60 minutes. Um, I feel sometimes like I used to listen to this guy named Dan Carlin, who you might know. He does this hardcore history podcast, which is really good. But he used to years ago have this common sense podcast. And he would describe his process. And I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I do. But you could tell that at times he didn't know how to land the plane. Like he didn't know how to end it. So he would do this monologue and then he would get to the end and you're like, okay, that's the end. And then he'd keep talking and then no, that's the end. And then he'd keep talking. I realized why, because it is hard to land the plane sometimes. So when I'll write my notes, I'll actually write like, here's how I want to end this one. And then I'll try to like run into that. And then the end becomes like a little bit more maybe thought out. Um, I kind of like doing the monologue podcast because I feel like just like writing forces you to grapple with ideas and get them down on, like get them straight in your mind. Having an outline and then talking through it forces you to do some things that I think mentally are just really productive. Um, the worst podcasts, and I'm going to confess doing this more frequently than I should. I will have here, like in my office, you can see there's a stack of books right there. Those are the books where authors have sent me their book and they want to be on the podcast. And those are the ones I've kept. The other ones I put in other places. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books there. I try to read them all. Sometimes I don't get through them and sometimes I don't get started. And so what I will do, I can read a book in an hour. Now that's not reading a book like page by page by page, but what I do is I start the book, I turn on my recorder, and then I just talk to it for an hour and I will thumb through the book and I'll be like, okay, here's an idea I want to explore and talk about. All right, here's an idea I want to explore and talk about. And then I'll just keep like flipping through and like plucking things out of the book that I want to talk about. That's my process. That's what I do. And yeah, I would be interested if you're doing another poll here, if we can pull it off. How many people prefer the interview and how many prefer the monologue? And if there's really like if just like I like all of them, that would be cool too.
Yeah. I'll get that set up. Tiffany, you have a great way of sort of setting up conversational interviews. Do you want to describe your sort of prep process as well? Because it is distinct, certainly more intensive, and I think the fruits of it are quite clear.
Yes, we have a great link. Suggest a guest. We have a system where people can tell us about individuals in their community who they think we should interview on the Bottom Up Revolution podcast. Because unfortunately, I'm not paid to travel the country and find these people or travel the world and find these people to be like a dream job. But so it's great that people are letting us know. So I go through those nominations, kind of see who seems like a good fit. And the ones that I think are a good fit, I reach out to them and I ask if we can have an intro chat. So we talk for 30 to 45 minutes. I get to know the basic outline of who they are, their story, what they're working on. Most times guests are a good fit. I think I've only had enough people to fit on one hand who I'm like, that's probably not a best fit. or just weird, like there's just like weird mutual ghosting. It's kind of awkward. I need to find a better way to say thanks for your time, but I don't think this is a good fit for the show, which I just haven't figured out how to do. Anyway, the ones that I move forward with, I send them a 2-page Google Doc. The first page is like, thanks. It's kind of like a brief logistical letter. So it's like, thanks for coming on the show. Here's what you need to know. Tells them all the logistics, how to prepare, a little bit about the software, what to bring, what to have, like in terms of like microphone and computer and all of that. Then the second page is a list of 8 to 10 questions that I anticipate using to structure the conversation. And I tell people that I'm about 80% on script and 20% riffing, which is pretty fun. So they get the questions ahead of time so they can prep. And we use, we've got our software and everything set up. We set up the date in Google Calendar. We show up. Like I said, we use those questions as a guide, with a good healthy dose of just fun, going off topic a little bit and talking organically. I have a way to close the show, which is I ask everybody to tell us about your town. What are 2 or 3 places you like to recommend people check out when they come to visit? And that's always a really fun way to wrap up. I am inspired every time to go on a road trip and visit all of the places because we've gotten some great recommendations. I think it'd be cool to actually check some of them out in real time one day. And then I saw Abby's closing line, thanks so much for listening. Keep doing what you can to build a strong town. And I actually, so reverse from Chet, I used to struggle with opening the show. And so now what I try to force myself to do is to sit down and actually write my intro and then write the intro for the guests. I have 2 paragraphs that are actually scripted. And then I submit all my files to Dropbox. And I don't know why Chris is not here. I don't know Chris at all. I've never met him, but I'm pretty sure he does our editing, and he's very gracious. Sometimes I have a very long list of show notes of edits. Places he needs to pay special attention to, but for the most part it's it seems to be flowing pretty well. I'm sure I'll get some feedback if there's ever any problems, but all the ladies and Chris behind the scenes, they're great putting everything together from that point. And I just keep notes during recording if there are any issues with edits or things that I need to send over. So that's my process.
Yeah, I always start my interviews before we record. I'm like, if you have the deer in the headlights look, which actually is more likely to happen to me than it is to you as the guest, we've got an editor and they will take care of it. Sierra, do you want to just briefly mention who Chris is? And meanwhile, we'll also start up a round of voting while you introduce a little bit of our process. So you can A, B, or C. Oh, shoot, my 3 options disappeared. A is interviews, B is solo monologues, and C is if you appreciate the variety. Let's see if this will work. But Sierra, why don't you share a little bit about just our process on the back end? What do we do with files? How do we get it to sound good?
Yeah. Chuck might know the story of Chris better than me, but he's been around longer than me.
He's a
And I
mystery though,
think
isn't he?
he freelances for us, so he will edit every podcast. And I think Chuck, you found him on I don't know, some website for work. I don't know what the website was.
Okay, so
I don't know how long ago.
I'll give you the story. So in the very early days of the podcast, I was doing this podcast and I got continual complaints about the audio quality. Like that was people were just horrified. They're like, you have terrible audio. And I mean, I was in bands for years. I got all this like real audio equipment for playing drums, but it doesn't translate real well for doing a podcast. So I was trying to make it work and it wasn't working well. And I also didn't really have the bandwidth to edit and keep things on time. So I went on one of those this would have been like 2010 or 11. I went on one of those like job websites where it's like hirefreelancer.com or something like that. And this guy got a hold of me and he's like, do you care if I live in Brazil? And I'm like, can you edit the podcast? He's like, sure. And I'm like, I don't care. I got to tell you, I've never spoken to him on the phone. I've never met him in person. I couldn't identify him from all, but we have had really nice email conversations. And he's been with us longer than anybody else in the organization editing podcasts. So
it's so true.
He's a mystery to me too, but Chris is really cool.
He's a wizard. He will edit things really fast too, and he's just super reliable. Super cool guy.
And by now
great.
he's got to
we need to send him like an award or something.
Yeah.
All the way to Brazil. We need to send him a package or something. Do you send him cookies, Chuck?
No, I should. Maybe that would be okay. So I know that he moved back to he was from the US. He was living in Brazil. I think he moved to Arizona now. So maybe I should like ask him because here's the sad thing is like I have not even interacted with him for like 3 years because you all take all care of all that. I usually talk to him in the podcast. So I'll start it out by saying, "Hey Chris, how you doing? Hope things are going well." And I'll say something to Chris and then I'll start the podcast. So he gets this little like personal thing from me.
Oh
I
my
do
gosh, we
that
should
a
all
lot.
start doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I do that a lot because I mean he's part of the team, but um, I should find out if he actually is in Arizona because it'd be cool to swing by and see him. I'm down there more now because my daughter's at school there. So yeah,
That's fun. I didn't realize that. And he's probably the most knowledgeable if he's listening to what, 4 podcasts a
every
week.
episode.
He
Yeah.
knows more
I
than you
mean,
do, Chuck.
yeah, he does. Actually, I would say that. And the thing is like he's been here since the very beginning. He used to give me feedback on the episodes, right? Because when I was trying to, the early episodes are really we switched platforms and we lost like the first 100 episodes. And people were really sad about that. Like, oh, this is a tragedy. And I'm like, it's so good that those are gone. Like, very happy about this. They did not need to stick around.
Yeah.
So he helped me in those early days kind of figure out where to put my mic and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. You lost the photos when you had braces and pimples, and that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Tiffany has to go. Thank you, Tiffany, for dropping in today. And yeah, we've got a couple more minutes here, so I'd love to take it up. One thing I called this solo sessions your sessions with Griff, Chuck, because those are the ones that stand out to me of you drinking Mountain Dew at 1 a.m. Up in your attic and enjoying that.
I'm trying not, I'm okay. I'm not old, but I'm older than when I started this. And I feel like the way you have stamina when you're 52 is by going to bed and eating well. And the way you have stamina when you're 32 is drinking a lot of Mountain Dew and just powering through. I told someone the other day, like if we had kids today, like an infant instead of an infant 20 years ago, it would be great. Like I would love it. I'd love kids, but I would be a horrible parent because you just have to have all of this endless stamina to do it. And at 52, I find myself like going to bed before midnight, which is very weird because I'd never, either 20 years I didn't, 30 years I didn't do that. So yeah, there's been fewer late nights with Griff episodes this year than maybe in years past, but Griff and I would trudge into the office and then, yeah, I would crack open a Mountain Dew at 12:30 at night and we'd riff for an hour and then go. And that was always I didn't get a chance to do this week. So I'm doing it when no one will bother me is basically how that worked.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Other questions or ideas, or even suggestions? What if you had a wonderful guest that you would like to see either on the Bottom Up Revolution podcast or showing up on the Strong Counts podcast? Any suggestions of folks? I think we've had the Freakonomics people recommended a few times. There's probably a bunch of other like standard ones, and I think you've said at points like if they'll come on, I would have them on. But there's others that probably if you've ever come across somebody that's interesting, we definitely take in those recommendations.
It's funny because I get people recommended all the time, right? And the Freakonomics people, we've been pushed to be on their podcast and they've actually called me and I chatted with them. And I think I'm going to say this, and I think that this is partially like my fault, but I think that they want something simpler. Like I'm trying to like, I knew that and I'm trying to like make it very simple, but like Minakozi stuff is what we talked about. And it's really, there's a lot there. And they're like, I don't know how we're going to do this on a podcast. We get people all the time are like, you should go on Joe Rogan. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. Like I would do that in a heartbeat if he called, but like someone make that happen. That's easier said than done. I think the one that is challenging for us is, and I'm going to say this, we're at a point now where when we ask people, they will come on, right? Like if I ask someone to be on the podcast, they generally will find a time because we're not in like the Joe Rogan territory, obviously a podcast, or the Freakonomics where you're getting 100,000 or 200,000 downloads. But in the space that we're in, we're like one of the most listened to podcasts, all three of our streams. And so when you ask someone, they're generally like interested in going on. I think the tension that I have is, and I'm not looking at you, Sierra, but I'm kind of looking at you. There's a communication strategy here that says when we have higher profile guests, like we'll get more downloads and you'll get more listeners and you'll grow the audience. And I think that that is generally true. I tend to want guests that I think are interesting though. So let me give you an example. And Norm, if you're going to share this, we probably should maybe not make this like the centerpiece. And so it tends to be like, okay, I could do this interview because maybe that would be like good for ratings, so to speak, but it's not really good for the audience. And I find generally that if like I'm not that jazzed about it, the audience is not going to be either.
Yeah.
So this is one of those like fine lines where I feel like the content and communications team we have here would like us to branch out a little bit more. And I tend to follow my own what's interesting kind of thing. That being said, tomorrow our podcast is Andres Dwani, who's like become a friend, and it was interesting, and it's going to run tomorrow as part of Member Week. I had a list of things I wanted to talk about. I told my wife, I said, guess how many questions I got to ask Andres in the hour-long podcast. And she guessed. She was being funny. She's like, how about one? And I'm like, how about zero? I actually asked zero questions. So be ready for that. That one runs tomorrow.
But it strikes me, I mean, this is not a sort of piggyback movement where we're just trying to piggyback onto, any sort of rising tide. Like there's that sense like we've had to row our own hoe, like really sort of break turf. And in order to do that, there's kind of had to be that like spirit of independence, and not necessarily that sense of like, oh, get somebody that just, has a platform and get on with them. I think that's where you've said we can go onto their platform. Sure, if Ezra Klein calls, you jump on the podcast, or Joe Rogan. But if the flip side is we've got to devote like precious airtime in a mission where we're like, hey, we're time bound, where we have, a 40-year sort of, or I mean, we're way behind in terms of trying to keep up with the suburban experiment. We've got a lot of work ahead of ourselves. Like we've got to get going. And I feel like that sense of the preciousness of time sort of weighs on this as well, even as we think of like the value of each one of us sitting down and listening for 45 minutes. Like that's something you've spent your attention on. And I think there's something profound in that.
Yeah. Well, Ezra Klein would be a good one. I mean,
Yeah.
I know at the beginning of the year, I read his book, and I think we made a couple inquiries for having him on. And, I mean, he's doing his own thing. I think Thompson, his co-writer, Derek, yeah, I'm sorry. That one might happen. That one might happen. Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be a good fit.
But you're right.
Yeah.
I think I've always said, like, if we were more strategic about just like, I don't want to say just blowing it. If we were less committed to our mission, maybe I'll put it that way. If we were less committed to our mission, we would be all about Trump, divide, like, like how do we simplify this down to like one thing that we need to do? We would be a lot more strategic maybe about some of those messaging things. Our mission is complex. The things we're trying to do are complex. And I feel like that makes podcasting a good format for us. But it also means that our growth is going to be slow and steady, wins the race, not, viral guess that we're trying to hawk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good thought experiment. What would Villain Chuck do with the Strong Towns organization, or sort of, Chuck with an MBA? Like, what would that look like compared to like the path that we've tried to take, which is more careful. Well, careful is probably not the right word, but Jake has a great question. Do you all have a favorite podcast to share with the crew here? Do you mean that broadly, Jake, or specifically for Chuck?
Jake, I shared my favorite one earlier. Maybe you weren't logged in yet, which is the I'm scrolling back because I can't remember. Tony,
Or do you
do you
mean
remember
a
the name?
podcast that Chuck listens to? After all, he only listens to himself in the shower. So
Right. I know it's hard to branch out when you have so much of your own content. But I was, yeah, specifically talking about other podcasts that you like.
Okay.
And I know most of the guests or hosts already left, but Sierra, you can, and Norm, you guys can jump in too.
Okay. So here's the thing. I don't read urbanist books. I don't read urbanist websites. I don't listen to urbanist podcasts. I really don't. I will keep them. I will keep a lot of them in my feed. And if something looks like new and interesting, I will listen to that. I will read that. But I don't like immerse myself in it. And I actually don't feel like it's really healthy to immerse myself in it. So this is my favorite podcast. It's the Dane Moore NBA podcast, and it's all about the Timberwolves. And I love listening to the talk about the Timberwolves. That's that's the podcast I listen to the most. The second one I listen to the most is called Gleeman and the Geek, and it's all about the Minnesota Twins. I tend to go between those two podcasts and then audiobooks. And I probably do an audiobook a week, maybe an audiobook every week and a half. So right now I'm doing God, the Science, the Evidence is my audiobook. And so I travel a lot. So like tomorrow I will drive to the airport, 2.5 hour drive. I will probably start by finishing off one of those podcasts, and then I'll listen to my book the rest of the way. I'll listen to the book through the airport onto the plane. And then when the plane takes off, I'll switch to music and start typing. But mine would be two sports related ones, just because I'm like to not think about, like, it's like it relaxes your brain a little bit, maybe. You ever see my reading list at the end of the year?
Right.
People used to get really disappointed because they're like, I come to you for like the great urbanist books. And I'm like, they're never on my list. It's always some weird book about physics or religion or like, I don't know.
Well, even for our staff retreat to help our team think about our work, we're reading a book about restaurants and how to run a restaurant well.
Yeah.
And it's that cross-pollination, like learning from outside your discipline in order to like step into these things. Sierra, we're gonna put you on the spot. Certainly if any others have ones to recommend, but do you have a top three? I cheated. I put mine in the chat. So but Sierra, you've got to share what do you listen to?
Yeah, I did respond to the comment. I think most recently I've been listening to Financial Audit with Caleb Hammer. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that. And yeah, he usually just, I don't know, rips people to shreds and shames them for their bad budgets, which I find incredibly entertaining. But he recently did talk to, I think it was the Michigan governor, I think. But it was I don't know, was it last week or this week that he came out with it where they audited the city budget, and that one was an interesting switch up.
Yeah.
Thought it was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Or the state budget, but yeah.
Well, as a super fan, you're going to have to introduce them to the finance decoder and then put that on their radar, because that'll be a whole other level.
That's what I thought. I was like, oh my God, maybe we should email him.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the wonderful thing about the podcasting format is that it's not time bound. But I know that many of us are. So we are at the top of the hour. I do want to acknowledge that we do often have the luxury of running long. But today I've got to step away. I know Chuck probably does as well. I suspect most of us do. But this has been great. I hope there were little glimmers of new insights, as well as just that sense of putting faces to names and seeing some of the names and the individuals behind the scenes as well. Thank you for participating today. This is a special session, so it's not like our regular Ask Strong Towns anything. That is coming up next week, is back in its regular time slot on Wednesdays at noon Central Time. And we're talking especially about questions related to passenger rail and transit. So we're picking up some of the transit related questions from the Jarrett Walker session we did a few weeks ago, and Mike Christensen, who does a lot of work and is a longtime Strong Towns member in Utah. He's done a ton of work on passenger rail, and we're going to be talking about some of the very real challenges there. So if you've ever wanted to take the train or took the train and it was a bad experience, come join us for that. And then the following week will be a regular session of Ask Strong Towns anything. But yeah, and then it's member week. And so a quick encouragement, if there's one person in your life that you know who is just like so close, just help them, nudge them across the line to become a Strong Towns member with you. We'll make it worth their while and continue to build a movement together. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Sierra. Thanks, the whole crew, for jumping in today. Really enjoyed this.
Thanks. Nice to see you all.
Good to see you too. Have a great rest of the day. Take care. Bye.